Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why it keeps doing that. I changed it to not have it fall asleep, but it keeps doing that. Yeah. I think it will be fine while he's presenting because it's going pretty big gap still, but it's also
All right, folks, 9 o'clock, grab an extra donut and coffee and a seat. Lots of new faces. We're good? All right, sweet. All right, good morning. I'm Vicki Englert. I'm the founder of Compiler. We're a small software consultancy with offices here in the building that works with local governments on digital transformation. I'm also the person who helped instigate Data and Donuts. We've been doing this since 2017. Our goal is to build a community of peers within government and sort of demystify what it's like working in government and encourage other folks to try out those jobs. How many of you, this is your first Data and Donuts? Sweet, cool, awesome. Welcome, we do it every month. We got a couple more scheduled, they're up on our website. How many of you work in digital identity? That's not true, there's not enough hands up. I know several of you work in digital identity. Cool, all right, well there's a good number of you here. It's my pleasure this morning to invite Greg. Greg's in town from San Francisco. Greg Fair is the Chief of Product and Chief of Digital Identity for the state of California. And it's been such a pleasure to work with somebody who has so much patience for government, even though he's only 3 years in. He comes to government from Google most recently. And I'm very excited for you to hear his vision for what the state can offer other departments in terms of services. So please welcome me in joining Greg this morning. We're live streaming. We'll turn it off before Q&A. And we have 2 events. These are our next 2 events coming up this summer to join us. A couple of jobs up here. And yeah, please join me in welcoming Greg.
Thanks for the introduction. Thanks so much for having me. Thank you for coming out, those of you that came in person. I want to actually reciprocate. It's been a really big learning experience for me. I came from startup and then Google for a decade. And Google's a big company. And I thought, okay, the state of California is kind of like a big company, right? Well, it's not. It's really different. And I think I learned a lot. I was lucky to be partnered with Compiler on some work very early in my career with the state and learned about how to get things done at the scale and speed of government. And I think we've actually been pretty effective. So we'll talk a little bit about some of that work. But I know for certain that none of what we've been able to accomplish so far could have happened without the team's help and some other partners we've been working with. So thank you very much for this and for all that you've been doing for us. I am here to talk a little bit about what it says here, California Digital Identity Framework. So we'll talk about what that is. But I'm just going to give you a little bit of a warning ahead of time to understand the journey to get to the point where we have anything even called a digital identity framework for California. There's a bit of storytelling involved. I actually looked up the difference last night. It was like 1:30 a.m. I'm like, what is the difference between a preamble and a prologue? It turns out I'm giving you both, and there will be a lot of it. So just be prepared. There is some context that you all need to have to understand why we are where we are right now, and so I'm going to give some of that story. We could start out here, which is that we actually published the California Digital ID Framework on the Digital ID Strategy site in December of 2023. So I guess my talk is done. I could just leave now and we're good. We actually did this a little while ago. So if you want to learn about the Digital ID Framework, there's a place to go learn about it. You are welcome to read that instead of talk to me. I will actually have a couple of slides in here that have the exact same words as we already put up 2 years ago, year and a half ago. But I think it's actually important to understand where that came from. So it turns out the digital ID team has been to Data and Donuts before. This is my handsome and kind and wonderful colleague, Jarrett Crumry. He is no longer in our group, but he does work in the Office of Data and Innovation, still with the state of California doing wonderful things. I still get to partner with him. But he came down and he spoke about this in June of 2023. And I have some of his slides. So I'm actually going to show you a couple of those in case you weren't there. Was anybody there for that, by the way? I'm just curious. Yeah, you one. All right. Well, good. This is why it's important. Sometimes it's good to repeat the prayer, and we'll talk a little bit about where we came from and why. This is a slide from his deck. He talked about our mission and principles. This is something that means a lot to us as a team. It's something we established early and we shared early. And the test, I think, of any vision is how well what you're doing still aligns with your mission and principles as you go down that path. Ideally, you're using that to guide you in the things you do and the decisions you make. Ideally, you spend enough time on that up front so that it still is relevant. Sometimes you need to update them. We also talked about our solution. This is from what he had shared. This is about 6 months, maybe a year or so into my entry into the role. Talked about how this could all work. And we were feeling pretty good about the way this all worked. This idea that there's multiple agencies, that we're going to build this thing called an identity gateway that helps both from a privacy and a scaling perspective, build identity for the state of California and work with maybe not one identity provider, but a limited set that let us accomplish all the needs that we have to serve all of California. And we even had some pretty cool diagrams. I did not design these. It was an engineer, as you might guess. This one also. But this reflected the state of the thing that we had built at the time. I could talk through it. I won't. But I want to go back even farther because 3 months into the job, actually 2 months into the job, I actually met with most of the leaders within the Department of Technology and some other CIOs across the state and talked about the kinds of things that we believed at the time we wanted to go build. You'll notice that my office was different. We've changed names twice since then. And we drafted a team mission. It's the same mission. These are the same things we've been talking about from the beginning, right? We really genuinely believe in this idea that the goal of an identity system isn't to identify. If your only goal is to show up to identify people, like you're doing the wrong thing because nobody shows up and wakes up in the morning and says, I really want to, prove who I am for a thing. That's not a thing. They're looking for access to a thing, and identity is part of that. They may be looking for it out of introspective curiosity. We did a lot of work on this at Google, like why do people even think about what identity means? What do we care about? But in the end, it's about making sure that people can access the stuff they need and doing it in a safe way and making sure that everybody can get to it. That's kind of where we start. And believe it or not, project principles, really bad slide. I made this one, but the exact same words on the page. So we're consistent about our approach here. It's where we started, and it's what we always come back to. So please keep these things in mind as context for how you're thinking about the work that you might want us to do, the work that we are doing, and hold us accountable for are we actually doing that and adhering to those principles. Believe it or not. Different diagrams, they look roughly the same, but they're a little bit different. They all say roughly the same thing, though, that we're building a system that's privacy safe and that is trying to limit the amount of data that is stored and keep users in control of what they're doing. And then I had this really, really great, awful analogy about like the boardwalk. If you know there, it's in Santa Cruz, and you got like this wristbands, and because some people might be taller or shorter, and some people might want like all access to everything, and some people might just want a few. And if you've been to the Giant Dipper, it's really, really bouncy, but not everybody can go on it. You have to be a certain height, right? And then there was this idea that the world is really complicated, and we could try to simplify it. And maybe we simplify it with just kind of 2 levels, because I think when I was first hired, the real task was SSO. So you'll see things about single sign-on everywhere. We still talk about single sign-on a lot, but you need to know that single sign-on as an explicit goal is not something that we are doing for the purposes of single sign-on, but rather for the purposes of allowing people to access things more easily and appropriately with the right level of controls. And so that's how we think about this. We want to enable single sign-on for the cases where it's relevant, and for cases where maybe it actually might make sense to have an additional sign-on or a separate system. We actually want to preserve the ability to do those things too. I think that's a significant difference in a huge state like California that is so diverse, that is so committed to making sure that everyone has access to services, including populations that might traditionally be excluded or underserved. And so what do we do from there? September 2022, we actually decided to go out and talk to the market about it. Some of the people in this room represent companies that actually participated in that market sounding. And we talked about the way it mattered at the time, because emergencies sometimes create the urgency around things that we need to do. And we knew because of COVID at the time that a lot of services that people wanted to access and would traditionally do in person, they either were not comfortable doing that or could not do that. And the lack of digital access to services at the time was a really big deal. So that particular emergency made us think deeply about how well we were serving those communities that needed to access things digitally. And we talked roughly about timing. You can see 2022 there, but the goal was, let's figure it out, let's test it out, and then eventually we'll scale it out. And that is actually what we ended up doing. So like I said, some of your companies are actually represented up here. We talked to a bunch of folks. And now we got another simpler idea, but it's the same thing you keep talking about. This is roughly what we built. This is the identity gateway. There are principles, same ones. And ta-da, with a partnership of Compiler, with a partnership of Monterey Transit, with a partnership of Caltrans and the Cal ITP program, with a partnership of some other technology vendors who helped us build this out in partnership with login.gov, we actually built a pilot and delivered it on, from what I've been told, in government time is insanely fast. So that makes me happy that we were able to get this out. This is a real thing. This is the moment where we all applaud ourselves and say we did a really, really good job. This was built exactly the way all those diagrams I was showing you earlier worked. If this were a different slideshow, that thing would flip through a whole bunch of other screens. And you'd see like all the fun logins. So now, we come back to our mission principles. We've won. Right? We built the thing we meant to do. We did it in the way we wanted to do it, the way we designed it. We thought about identity as a service that we provided to everyone, and with the flexibility and scalability to go everywhere. So we're pretty pleased with how these things are going. We've got this model for the thing that we built, which is exactly this. We built the identity gateway. It works with identity providers, and it works with all these agencies potentially, and starting with a couple, from federal to state to local partnership. So we are feeling pretty good about ourselves somewhere late 2022. And so we've now got an updated system for exactly what we did. We made a new graphic. No, I'm totally joking. This is a Shutterstock photo. You can see it's on there. Basically what we did, and I did this, I just typed into search engine, show me an image of what a single sign-on service might look like. And this is what popped up. So the truth is that innovation that I was talking about earlier really wasn't all that innovative. All we were really doing is something that kind of made sense. And what we realized as soon as we launched that first pilot, and if I'm being totally honest, a little bit before, when we talked to different agencies and we talked to people that are really using these services, is that the thing that we built is a connection between CDT and identity providers in order to let people access things. And when most people think about identity, that's what they're thinking about. Our problem was that what we really needed was something that helped people access things. And your identity is almost always, in government world, not enough. Because with government services, your eligibility for a service is defined by some other attribute that may or may not be directly tied to what are the things that might be on your driver's license or on your passport or on whatever you log in on online to something that identifies you for who you are. Because there are other attributes that are really important. We know some of them because the federal government actually defines them. In terms of transit benefits, we know that some of them are related not just to age, which kind of comes with your identity, but also to other attributes like veteran status, income level, student status, disability. So these other parts that aren't going to be obvious on your driver's license. So we needed to think about what it really means to reach all of the types of eligibilities that are necessary. So now we're rethinking everything. We thought we did it, but we clearly didn't. And we're trying to figure out how to build the rest of that out. So we're changing our model a little bit for now, how we think about the diagram. And so the thing I want you to take away is how we think about the system with our digital identity gateway. And that informs the framework. So what we're recognizing is this. There are many different services that might help us define eligibility. And there are a few different services we can use to help define identity. Identity is roughly the same. I think the real question of identity is, are you eligible? Do you have the attributes that you can use that identity service? There might be one identity service like login.gov that we use right now as an integration. Not everybody can use login.gov, and we know that. So we want to make sure that every person who's seeking a service can also identify themselves digitally. So we know that we need at least one more, and likely a few identity providers. What we're trying to get from is the world right now where effectively every department, every agency, every smaller group, even subgroups have their own system. That's what really fragments it. So maybe it's not single sign-on, maybe it's like multi-single sign-on. I don't know what the catchphrase is, but we're gonna get it down from dozens down to a few. That's a really important step for us to simplify the world for government service seekers, and it's also important for us to simplify the world of the systems that we're building. Eligibility services, the data can come from a lot of places, and it really depends on what service you're looking for. But roughly, some of the things I was just talking about earlier are the kinds of things we should be thinking about. So what do? We said, okay, we've got our new system, we've got our new model, we're gonna go figure out how to go solve this problem too, where we now have not a single system where identity is just a bunch of identity providers, but it's the mix of matching who you are with the eligibility you have for certain services, because with government, that's actually really important when you're claiming services. And we went and built it. We tied into a bunch of things, and now today, roughly, this is actually what it looks like. You're going to a service, the CDT Identity Gateway works, and it connects to an identity provider. In this case, login.gov is something we've had integrated for a while. We like it and believe in it. We think there will be more. And then one of the example integrations we have is with Veterans Affairs. So this is a federal partnership where we use an API that lets somebody under their control confirm that they are a veteran of a certain status to confirm their eligibility for a benefit. And once we did this, once we unlocked more than just identity, which is effectively being commodified right now. There are a lot of providers that provide identity, so it's just going to be which identity provider makes the most sense for you, right? We need to map that to an eligibility service. That's where we are, and that's what we did. And now we've got a system that looks a little bit different. If you squint at it, you can look at it later. Take a picture if you like. It's also up on a website. You'll see some versions of this, but what we now have is a system where we're not only checking who you are, but we're also checking if you're eligible for the service. And then when we send back to the client, in this case, Monterey Transit, isn't a huge data dump of all the information we just used that you provided, but instead, we effectively act as a filter. And what we say is, you asked us to confirm that this entity coming to you is eligible for this service. And what we can tell you is, yes, they are. And we're assuming you don't really want to know any more than that. So, Vicky mentioned earlier my background was at Google. What she didn't mention is that my background at Google was this, in the end, for the last few years there, as the lead of the privacy product team. Privacy front and center to what I did. I was the product lead, the privacy product lead for Google's GDPR work. So I spent a lot of time thinking about what privacy and what consent looks like, about how to build systems in a way that from the get-go are private and secure, rather than trying to fix it on the back end after you've already stored the data. So what we firmly believe, and you saw that in our principles, is that the first step to preventing data access is not storing the data at all. So we're always asking the question, should the data be stored? Should the data be shared? In this case, the client doesn't need to know all of the information about who the person is. They just need to confirm that they match the eligibility that's being asked for. So that's what we built. As of today, we are now at technical scale for a number of different types of eligibilities and services. We have the ability now to really go out and start scaling because we can meet the needs of a lot of the different agencies and departments that we talk to across the state. Different types of things like veteran status. We use CalFresh, which is the SNAP program in California, and eligibility for that as a proxy for income, and it is used as a common categorical proxy. Obviously, birth date can be calculated from identity, and we're also using Medicare enrollee related to disabled status. So we're tackling a part of the problem, and we can do it across a number of categories now, which we're really happy about. We want to get more people access, we want more services, but we now have enough we can really start scaling and going out. And what that looks like when it comes together, on the left is an actual screenshot of the flow that the compiler team built that lets people choose, based on what their eligible category is, how to go through the flow, and then they can confirm their eligibility based on that. This is something that we know can scale to things outside of transit and applies to a number of other different groups as well. And it worked. Immediately, we were able to scale out and start hitting more partners who wanted this kind of feature. As a matter of fact, Sacramento Regional Transit, the reason that they told us very explicitly they signed on is because we had the ability to add veteran status as a benefit that they actually did not offer before. And it wasn't until we said, hey, we can actually deliver this to you, they changed their policies so that veterans were able to get a discount on transit in the area. So this is where the technology can actually lead the policy based on demonstrating what is possible. So as we try to expand this out, that's part of what scale means. I don't think of a good reason why every transit agency across the state shouldn't be providing these exact same sets of discounts. And it's very reasonable and possible that the reason they hadn't done it before is because they actually didn't think it was easily possible. So now we've won. We have a definition of the gateway that we built. It's not just about identity, it's about helping with eligibility verification. And what's the thing that we're building? We're working with identity providers for authentication, and we're working with other data providers, trusted data providers, in a secure way for applicant eligibility data. This is now kind of a system that's starting to make a lot of sense for us. And so now, with the preamble done, actually, with the prologue done, there's a little bit more preamble. This is a prettier version of what we've been talking about. It's the same flow I talked with you through earlier, keeping in mind that all these steps are done in a privacy-safe way. You can kind of look through this yourself, but this is the way we think about it, that CDT sits in the middle as a way of creating a safe, efficient, secure method for individuals to identify what they need and share that information with the right level of information with the service that they're seeking. It's that simple for us. We're trying to keep the data down to a bare minimum of what's required and protect users along the way. So now this is where we started, 12/23. We published this website. We had an idea of how it could all work. And now we'll have a chance to talk about the digital ID framework. So the framework, same mission and principles. They're on the site. I don't think we frame it specifically as labeling it mission and principles, but you should know these are the exact words that we've been using the whole time. They matter a lot. We start with security because the thing that we all know very profoundly is that if a system isn't secure, all the rest of the stuff that we do on top of it doesn't matter. You all see this in the news every day. You probably experienced it yourself. Maybe you have your data in a healthcare system that was breached, or you have your data in a healthcare system, in a gene system that was breached, right? With some of the different credentials that are out there, through no fault of your own. It could be just because some of the systems that were designed by a particular company, or it was sold and the policies changed. There are any number of reasons why. But security is kind of the baseline, like on the hierarchy of needs for technology systems. If we're storing the data and it's not secure, nobody can trust anything. So we've always started there. We work very closely with an amazing security team at the Department of Technology to make sure that our systems meet those standards and go beyond. Privacy by design, for us, that starts kind of where I came from. We said, okay, we always ask the first question, should we be doing this at all? Are we building the most private system? Is that actually the need? Is that data needed? Is it required? Or is it something we can do optionally? Can we do it later? Do we need to be in control of it? Would it make more sense for the user to be in control of this rather than us to aggregate it centrally? So these are all the questions we ask up front. And then we ask a question of, okay, if we're going to build this system, can we build it in a way that all the people can access it? And can they do it in a way that makes sense for them? So as we go through those questions, what we're realizing is that our system is actually working to address a lot of those. We're now touching on making sure that, for example, our integration with login.gov we like, because if you can't do things online, you can actually go to a post office to complete registration, right? That's important. Multi-language support, we want to continue to work to expand that. We have multi-language support, we need more, and we're pushing that. I think when I was at Google, when I started at Google, I think our baseline was around 35 languages. Within a couple of years, our baseline was 65 languages. Within about 5 years after I joined, this is mid-2010s, most products that we launched were somewhere around 75 language support. And we wouldn't go out with even legal language that hadn't been reviewed at scale with at least a half dozen languages. So these are the kind of things that we want to make sure that we're addressing with our systems. A little bit harder for us in some cases. We don't have quite that scale, but we're working with partners that do prioritize these things. And then the last one is around openness and transparency. It's not just talking about what we do in publishing our policies and engaging with the community and engaging with the vendor community about this. It's also making sure that the work we do can be used by others CDT has an open source technology policy. Anytime we can open source our technology, we will. The work that we've done here with the Gateway certainly falls within that purview. And we are working with partners that have those same kinds of policies. We're really happy that Compiler has those same policies too. So now, the framework itself, what is it? It's not just the technology. We kind of knew what we were doing on the technology side the whole time. We had this idea of how we wanted to approach it. But it's also all of the stuff that goes around it. How are we thinking about delivery of the services? And how do we make sure that we have the means to deliver that within the government at government scale? Do we have contracts in place and agreements in place that can be replicated so that we want to sign a new partner for a new data provider, we actually know exactly what we're doing. Like, that's how we're thinking about these things. And the goal is to streamline the eligibility process, but to keep it private and secure. There's some general goals. It's about access, right? We also know already that it is both cheaper from a cost perspective and more efficient from a time and human perspective for handling this, if we can do it at scale and we can do it digitally. Even in cases where we can't move 100% of things online, reducing the stress of the in-person work, of the manual work that's happening at many departments across the state is a huge win. So this is one of those cases where the perfect does not have to be the enemy of the good. If we can take 80% of the use cases or even 50% of the use cases and move them online, it means that the other 50% can be handled by the people who are already overworked that are handling all this work manually. And then back to my earlier point, security and privacy. There's some general value props that we cover here. These are more bullet points to think about how we are thinking about the world. But we are now feeling pretty good about our whole system. This is the graphic from the Digital ID Framework site. This is actually our current state of how we think about the world. It's an idea that we not only have multiple types of eligibility providers, multiple identity providers within some reason, but we can work with different groups. These are hypothetical integrations. Some of them do exist, some of them don't. But all of them are things we've been working on and talked to. We know these are real needs. And the example here is just to say that we can build one system that addresses all of these needs and then starts to scale out each of our individual decisions as we go through, so that every single department across the state of California and other local partnerships that we have, they don't all need to keep reinventing the wheel here. That is our goal. It's a scale problem of technology, it's a scale product of policy, and it's a scale question of the financing, as well as the administration. And I think these are all really big wins. We're seeing that at small scale with even the limited pilots that we are authorized to run with right now. But as we move out of our pilot mode and into a more scalable future, we're excited to see that multiply. It went well. We won an award. We're feeling really good about ourselves again, right? But and a bunch of new projects that we are starting to work on. We are working with a number of transit agencies, but also moving out of transit. We have been working with the California Privacy Protection Agency on some other use cases that are a little bit different that we're excited about, that address some specific needs that they have around letting people choose to opt out of marketing based on some legislation that passed a year ago, and that'll be coming into effect next year. So we're doing more work in this space. And it's all because of that foundation that we laid. It was actually pretty easy for us technically to layer it on. I can tell you that the biggest challenges we have had going forward and where we are focusing our efforts now are administrative. We are trying to figure out what are the right contract models that make sense, what are the right ways to think about chargebacks. We know the numbers are lower, so people are excited to pay it, but we don't have the right mechanisms in place to do that because we are transitioning from what was officially a pilot at the start of our project to what we believe in the future will be a full-fledged project with all of the overhead that goes with that for the state of California, but all the benefits as well. We're also working now with industry. We started working with Login.gov on the work that they are doing. We are the only state member of the Login.gov's Threat Intelligence Working Group. Our goal, from a state perspective, is to make sure that there are clearly defined lines between how the federal government and the state governments work, to make sure that we are identifying threats early, but also making sure that maybe we have less data to be threatened. I think that's a really important theme that we kind of keep coming back to, and we have some wonderful partners there that have been thinking about this from the very early days. And speaking of things that catalyze and things that move, I think Mark Twain, and you can look this up, misattributed, but talks about history repeating itself, maybe more rhyming. It's more of a paraphrase than his exact quote, but it's entirely true. The things that we see that make us think about the world and how we deliver services change based on certain events. And as much as the vaccine, as much as the COVID pandemic affected how we thought about delivery of digital services, the fires in LA affected how we think about delivery of any services, digitally or not, because there were a number of people affected in some areas that maybe weren't directly within our purview, but certainly were extremely relevant to how we thought about service delivery going forward. I imagine with this community here in particular, very apt and close to the heart. So from the state perspective, it catalyzed a lot of work that crystallized some things we've been thinking about in the past. How do we spin up support resources quickly in order to deliver services to the people that need them in a timely manner? And what can we do to help with the recovery effort? The way our systems work right now, we discovered, even if we built a really great system for identification, even if we built a really great system for eligibility checks, it turns out all of the systems at the state aren't quite ready to consume all of this yet. And we were focused in the past on the ones that we knew were available. Like it was a kind of a practical approach. We weren't going to partner with a group that still had 3 or 4 years to go until they're technologically ready. But something like the LA fires, when you start to look at the problems, it changes how you think about prioritization. And you say, maybe what we should really be working on is the thing that's actually most important, not just the most practical. So over the last few months, we've been working on vital records as a pilot for how we think about digital identity and verification so that we can deliver vital records and you can apply to receive them digitally, which you could do before. There were some third parties that did it, but the state didn't provide one, the counties didn't provide one. You also could do it through the state. Like there were some ways to do that, but the challenge was digital delivery within the state of California for applications for vital records as of when the fires happened was you download a form, it's digitally available, maybe you even fill it out online, but then you take it to a notary, get the notary to sign it, and then you send it in. The good news is you could send it in via email, and there were dedicated staff that worked very hard to make sure that they processed that as quickly as possible, identified the correct place it needed to go, because there's all kind of reasons why this might be challenging, because you might actually not be in the right county, you might actually not have the right information on there, you might not even be eligible to request the record that we're talking about, right? And then we could mail it to ideally an address that still has a house standing, right? So many challenges here that are in a different world outside of the purview of what I would be thinking about on a day-to-day basis. But because of the urgency of the situation, because as we realized, the way we apply our technologies that really matters is to figure out the most valuable use cases and try to solve for them. So the next phase of where we're headed is the last thing I just wanted to talk to you about. We believe the system we built works really well. It is scaling the way we wanted to. It's scaling the way we planned. But there are some things that have happened that cause us to think maybe we move slightly outside the realm of what just digital identity is. And maybe we move slightly outside of the realm of what just digital identity and eligibility checks are. Because in the end, nobody's showing up in the morning saying, I need to identify myself online. That's not a thing, that's a goal. The goal is to get access to a service, to get access to your records, and make that easier, faster, and cheaper. So, as we look at that, what does that mean for us? We are looking at ways we can make sure documents can be digitized and partnering with some groups that are already doing that. The particular digital ID part of that is how we do verification and then sharing of that in a safe way. So we are working with some partners to try and deliver some of that. Some of that works with our existing systems. Some of that we're building bespoke, and some of that we have vendors that can work on some of those issues as well. There are a number of services out there that provide notary online, and the statutes in California are moving forward some of those efforts, so we can start in certain cases to offer that. Proof is a technology partner we've been working with right now. There are other ones that we work with too. We think there's a path forward to building online notarization for the state of California, and we expect to be launching something that provides for that in a few specific instances within the near future. There is actually a living, breathing demo of how this works in the real world already online. This isn't something that's going to be a multi-year project. We are not far away from making it possible. One of the things we realized when we started our work with transit is that identity and verification is great. We also need to think about how benefits are dispersed. In many cases, that is actual real money. And the way people receive money is very complicated. It's often also very inefficient. So when you move into a fully well-verified digital world, there are ways that you can send benefits to people, send money to people in a way that lifts them up and also delivers it at scale without some of the overhead costs that we see from a lot of other systems that might involve mailing via the postal service a physical preloaded debit card, which has all of, you can just imagine every single challenging step along the way there. And then thinking about, in the end, if we provide the service, should we be providing it digitally as well as providing it in paper? What does that look like for us? Simple things like park passes. These should be available digitally. The industry is moving that way right now. Both Apple and Google have made notable announcements about their native platforms. Our own California DMV has launched an app, a wallet that supports digital credentials and storing them there. Your MDL, your mobile driver's license, can be stored in your digital wallet, either through the DMV wallet or through the native wallets. And Apple just announced the ability to start reading that, both from websites as well as issuing them from other apps. So within the next year, you're going to see a proliferation of digital credentials across the mobile space, the same way we saw that happen with credit cards and payments in mobile wallets when that first started over a decade ago. And so we need to think about wallets and how our own wallet works and what are the options and how we think about that as we go forward into an AI and data-driven world where the data that you hold becomes maybe one of your most valuable assets. And who should be holding that data? There are different models for wallets and different data store systems that might allow an end user to have greater control than simply handing it over to a private company or a public agency. There is a direction there and a group working on those kinds of things that we're excited to keep partnering with, and we think that's a model that will make sense in the future. We are building a foundation, the digital identity framework, that is forward-looking from a technological perspective so that we can anticipate these kinds of things as we move forward. So that last thing that I was just talking about, and I just said one more thing because, Apple. This was just a week ago. Apple announced at WWDC their support for some things that we had anticipated coming. Like, if I'm being honest, I had hoped it would have come about a year earlier, but we knew it just made sense. And so we're glad that Apple and Google are supporting these standards and moving further down the line to support different kinds of identities. Because in the end, if you remember where we started on this, what we believe is that it's hard to have one identity to rule them all. Because in California, we have too many people in too many different situations that might or may not be comfortable or even able to get a federal ID or a state ID, or they might not have the documentation, or they might just be scared to do it. So how do we make sure that every single person right now within California seeking services, and when we look ahead in 2028, when the entire world comes, or even next year with the World Cup, when the entire world comes to LA, to California, to try and access services that might be available, how do we make sure that we are able to read their identity, have them identify themselves, and then get access to services? Those are the things we're starting to think about. A couple of big announcements from there. Riley Hughes over at Trinsic had some thoughts on it too. I think he was spot on in terms of his analysis of what is possible. So this digital identity framework, if you look at that bottom part, I didn't call it out, but if you were very sharp-eyed, you might have noticed it wasn't just about the eligibility and it wasn't just about the identity. We are looking at the delivery. Where are you going to store that identity once you have it? We have a California DMV wallet that's based on open standards, aligned with our openness and transparency principles. That is the way we believe these things can be built going forward for the people that want to do it. We want to create more options for that. We want to make sure that agencies have the ability to go ahead and issue credentials so that you can get, yes, your park pass or your driver's license, but other types of credentials that might be urgent and they might be important for you as you're trying to rebuild. Things like real estate licenses. Actually, these are things that are reasonable to be delivered digitally and stored locally. And at some point, we believe that a lot of these credentials will be stored by the end user, and we just need to make sure that we are building a system that can accommodate that future and can read from all those situations, all those systems. So that's where we think we're headed. we don't know where things are going. We are taking really educated guesses and trying to make sure the system that we build is going to be ready for that when it comes. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.